A decorated cop is sentenced to death, his daughter watching in shock as her world crumbles. The evidence is airtight, the public wants blood, and in 24 hours, he'll be gone forever. But then, against all logic, his daughter does the unthinkable. She breaks him out of prison. Why? What does she know that the world doesn't? And when the truth finally comes out, will it set them free or destroy them both? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the crowded courtroom, casting harsh shadows across worn faces. Detective Samuel Hayes sat perfectly still at the defendant's table, his weathered hands resting on the smooth wooden surface. The dark blue prison jumpsuit hung loosely on his frame, a stark contrast to the crisp suits he once wore as a respected detective. His shoulders, though straight, carried the invisible weight of months in custody. In the back row, Olivia Hayes held her breath, her knuckles white as she gripped the wooden bench. The past 6 months of trial had taken their toll: sleepless nights, endless worry, and the constant struggle to maintain normalcy for her young son Jacob. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, testament to countless hours spent poring over case files and witness statements. Her childhood friend Rachel Montgomery squeezed her hand gently, offering silent support. The jury foreman rose slowly, his face etched with deep wrinkles that seemed to deepen as he cleared his throat. The paper in his hands trembled slightly, the rustling sound deafening in the hushed courtroom. In the matter of the state versus Samuel Hayes on the charge of first-degree murder, we the jury find the defendant. The pause felt eternal, stretching like a rubber band about to snap. Guilty. The word crashed through the courtroom like a thunderbolt. A collective gasp rippled through the spectators, followed by a wave of whispers. Olivia's world tilted sideways, her vision blurring as tears welled up. Her father, the man who had taught her right from wrong, who had devoted his life to protecting others, sat there, somehow maintaining his composure. His back remained straight, his expression unchanged, as if carved from stone. Judge Eleanor Cartwright's voice cut through the murmurs, sharp and cold. "Order in the court." She adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses, looking down at Samuel with detachment that bordered on disdain. Her thin lips pressed into a tight line as she spoke. "Detective Samuel Hayes, you have been found guilty of a most heinous crime. Your position as a law enforcement officer makes this betrayal of public trust even more egregious." The prosecution team exchanged satisfied glances, shuffling papers with barely concealed triumph. The lead prosecutor's smile didn't quite reach his eyes as he organized his briefcase. The victim's family huddled together in the front row, their sobs of relief mixing with the constant click and flash of media cameras. "This court hereby sentences you to death by lethal injection," Judge Cartwright pronounced, her gavel striking with finality. The sound echoed through the chamber like a gunshot. Samuel remained eerily still, his face a mask of calm acceptance that scared Olivia more than any show of emotion would have. He didn't look defeated. He looked resigned, as if he'd known this moment was coming all along. His eyes, clear and steady, found Olivia's across the room carrying a message she couldn't quite decipher. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Reporters jumped to their feet, shouting questions and jostling for position. Their cameras flashed like strobe lights, capturing every moment of the historic verdict. The victim's family embraced each other, their tears now mixed with smiles of vindication. The air grew thick with tension and conflicting emotions. 2 guards approached Samuel, their movements mechanical and practiced. Their boots squeaked against the polished floor as they positioned themselves on either side of him. The chains of his handcuffs clinked softly as they prepared to escort him away. Olivia watched, her heart shattering, as her father, her hero, was led toward the side door. She stumbled to her feet, her legs barely supporting her weight. Rachel tried to steady her, but Olivia pulled away, needing to escape. The room was spinning, closing in around her. The faces in the crowd seemed to morph into accusatory masks. She pushed through the crowd, ignoring the whispers and stares that followed her, the sound of her rapid breathing loud in her ears. Just outside the courtroom, a reporter materialized in front of her, thrust a microphone toward her face. His eyes gleamed with predatory enthusiasm, his perfectly pressed suit a stark contrast to his ruthless demeanor. How does it feel to be the daughter of a murderer? The question hit her like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly, the faces around her blurring into a hostile mass. The marble walls appeared to close in, suffocating her with their grandeur. Without a word, Olivia turned and ran, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she fled from the truth she couldn't accept. Each step echoed with the weight of her new reality, the daughter of a condemned man. The kitchen clock ticked relentlessly as Olivia sat at her small wooden table, her dinner growing cold before her. The plate of pasta she'd mechanically prepared sat untouched, the sauce congealing in the harsh glare of the overhead light. Steam had long since stopped rising from the noodles, a testament to how long she'd been sitting there, lost in her thoughts. Her phone buzzed again, the 15th time in the past hour, sending vibrations across the table's surface that made her coffee mug rattle slightly. With trembling fingers, she picked up the device, her hand shaking so badly she almost dropped it. Another news alert. Decorated detective turned killer, Hayes family's dark legacy. Her stomach churned as she set the phone face down, but the persistent buzzing continued, each notification feeling like a small stab to her heart, a reminder of how quickly their world had crumbled. Opening her laptop, Olivia's breath caught in her throat. The trial footage had gone viral, with thousands of shares and comments. Her eyes skimmed the text, each word more venomous than the last, the blue light from the screen casting harsh shadows across her face. Like father, like daughter, watch out for her kid, bad blood. They should lock up the whole Hayes family, murderer's daughter walking free. The words blurred together as tears threatened to spill, her vision swimming with each hateful comment. She quickly wiped them away with the back of her hand when she heard small footsteps padding into the kitchen, the sound echoing in the quiet house. "Mom!" Jacob's voice was small, uncertain. He stood in his Superman pajamas, his dark hair tousled from tossing and turning in bed, clutching his favorite stuffed bear. Why are people saying Grandpa is a bad man? Olivia's heart shattered. How could she explain this to her 8-year-old? The same little boy who just last month had proudly shown his grandfather's police badge for show and tell, beaming with pride as he told his classmates about his hero. Her mouth opened, but no words came out, the truth stuck in her throat like glass. Before she could find her voice, her laptop chimed with a new message. The sender was anonymous. "Your family is filth. You should all pay." Olivia slammed the laptop shut with enough force to make Jacob jump, but the damage was done. Jacob had seen it, his young face crumpling with confusion and hurt. Her phone rang, Rachel's name flashing on the screen, accompanied by a photo of happier times. Olivia answered, her voice barely a whisper. "Hey." "Liv, I'm worried about you." Rachel's voice was gentle but firm, filled with the concern of a lifetime friend. Maybe it's time to accept what happened. Move forward, for Jacob's sake." "You don't understand," Olivia replied, watching as Jacob climbed into the chair across from her, his bear dragging on the floor. "Dad is innocent. I know it. The evidence was wrong." Olivia cut her off, her voice gaining strength. "Rachel, I can't just..." A beep interrupted their call. Another incoming message. This one from Mrs. Peterson, Jacob's teacher. "Due to recent events, we feel it's best to postpone our parent-teacher conference indefinitely." Olivia's hand tightened around the phone until her knuckles turned white. Just yesterday, she'd seen parents pulling their children away from Jacob during pickup time, whispering and pointing. Her son's birthday party invitations had all been declined with flimsy excuses, each rejection another small wound to her son's innocent heart. The phone rang again. James Callahan's name appeared on the screen. Olivia's heart stopped. Her father's lawyer never called this late unless something was terribly wrong. Her fingers trembled as she answered. "Olivia." His voice was heavy, weighted with devastating news. "The execution is set for 24 hours from now." The phone slipped from her grasp, clattering onto the couch as she collapsed beside it. Her chest felt too tight, the room spinning around her as the weight of those words crushed down on her shoulders like a physical force. The kitchen clock continued its relentless ticking, counting down the precious hours she had left. The heavy prison gates opened with a grinding metallic screech that sent chills down Olivia's spine. Her heels clicked against the concrete floor as she followed two stone-faced guards down a seemingly endless hallway. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on the institutional gray walls. The air was stale and cold, carrying echoes of countless footsteps that had walked this path before. Her heart pounded harder with each step. This wasn't like her regular visits. This was different. This was goodbye. Her fingers twisted nervously at the simple gold wedding band she still wore, a habit she'd developed since her husband's death. The visitor's room was smaller than she remembered, or maybe the weight of what was coming made everything feel more confined. A single metal table bolted to the floor dominated the space, with two chairs on opposite sides. The air smelled of industrial cleaner and despair. A security camera blinked silently in the corner, its red light a constant reminder of their lack of privacy. When they brought her father in, Olivia's breath caught in her throat. Samuel Hayes, once a commanding presence in his detective's badge and suit, now wore faded prison orange that hung loose on his frame. His hands were shackled, chains running down to bolts in the floor. But his eyes, they remained the same, clear, determined, unafraid. The gray at his temples had spread since her last visit, but his shoulders were straight, his chin lifted with quiet dignity. "Dad," she whispered, fighting back tears. Her voice sounded small in the concrete room. Samuel's smile was gentle, almost peaceful. It made her want to scream. How could he be so calm when in just hours? She could see the pulse beating steadily in his neck, each beat precious and numbered. "You're stronger than you think," he said simply, as if reading her thoughts. His voice carried the same warmth it had when she was a little girl scraping her knees on the playground. The words ignited something in Olivia. "Why won't you fight?" she demanded, her voice cracking. "We could file another appeal. There's still time to—" Her hands clenched into fists on the table's cold surface. Olivia. Just her name, spoken softly, but it stopped her mid-sentence. His eyes held hers, conveying volumes of unspoken words. In them, she saw a lifetime of love and determination. A guard approached their table, his movements hesitant. Without making eye contact, he placed a folded piece of paper near Olivia's hand. The motion was subtle, almost unnoticeable. Her fingers closed around it instinctively, the paper warm and slightly damp from the guard's nervous palm. "Time's up," another guard announced from the doorway, his voice echoing against the bare walls. Olivia stood, her legs shaking. "Dad, please." The words caught in her throat like thorns, but Samuel just smiled, that maddeningly peaceful smile again. As they led him away, the chains rattling with each step, Olivia clutched the letter in her pocket like a lifeline. She watched until the last echo of his footsteps faded away. That night, sitting at her kitchen table with Jacob finally asleep upstairs, Olivia unfolded the worn paper with trembling hands. Her father's familiar handwriting filled the page, each careful stroke a reminder of the man who had taught her to write her name. "My life ends today, but my story doesn't. There is one last thing I need you to do. Trust no one, not even those you love." The words blurred as tears finally spilled down her cheeks. She pressed her hand to her mouth to muffle a sob, the letter crinkling in her grip. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence, counting down the precious hours remaining until dawn. Outside, a gentle rain began to fall, as if the world itself was mourning what was to come. Olivia's hands trembled on the steering wheel, her knuckles white from gripping it too hard. The streetlights cast long shadows across her tear-stained face as she stared at the letter on her dashboard. Her father's neat handwriting seemed to mock her with its cryptic message, each carefully formed letter a reminder of his methodical nature. "Trust no one, not even those you love." The words echoed in her mind, over and over, like a haunting melody she couldn't silence. Her phone buzzed again, the vibration seeming to shake the whole car in the stillness. Rachel's name flashed on the screen, and Olivia's stomach twisted into knots. She'd known Rachel since they were kids, sharing lunchboxes in elementary school. They'd shared everything: secrets, dreams, heartbreaks. But now, her father's warning made her question even that friendship, poisoning decades of memories with doubt. She answered with shaking fingers, her breath catching. "Hey, Liv, I've been trying to reach you for hours." Rachel's voice was soft, concerned, with that familiar gentle tone that had always comforted Olivia before. "You need to stop this. He's gone. You have to think about Jacob now. Your boy needs you." Olivia closed her eyes, fresh tears threatening to spill, the mention of Jacob making her heart ache even more. "You don't understand, Rachel. Something's wrong here. Dad wouldn't write this unless..." "Unless what? He's a convicted murderer, Liv. The evidence was clear. Please, just let it go. Come stay with me tonight. We'll get through this together, like we always have." The words felt rehearsed, almost too perfect, like lines from a script. Olivia's chest tightened as she remembered her father's warning again. Could Rachel be involved? The thought made her sick, bile rising in her throat. "I can't," Olivia whispered, her voice barely audible. I need time alone." "Liv." She hung up, tossing the phone onto the passenger seat where it landed with a soft thud. The digital clock on her dashboard showed 7:43 p.m., its green numbers a stark reminder that time was slipping away. Less than 5 hours until the execution. Her father had always taught her to trust her instincts, to listen to that quiet voice inside that whispered when something wasn't right. Right now, every fiber of her being screamed that something was terribly wrong. The trial had been rushed, the evidence circumstantial at best. And now this letter, arriving just hours before his scheduled execution. She picked it up again, running her fingers over the paper, feeling the slight indentations where his pen had pressed. There had to be more to it. Her father was too smart, too careful to leave her with just a warning. He'd taught her to look deeper, to question everything, to never accept the obvious answer without digging further. The prison loomed ahead, its walls dark against the night sky like an ancient fortress. Security lights illuminated the perimeter, creating pools of harsh white light that cut through the darkness. 2 guards patrolled the outer fence, their flashlights sweeping across the ground in steady, methodical patterns. Olivia's heart raced as she made her decision, adrenaline coursing through her veins. She couldn't let her father die without knowing the truth. If there was even a chance he was innocent, she had to try. For Jacob, who deserved to know his grandfather's true legacy. For herself, because she couldn't live with the uncertainty. For justice, because something about this whole situation felt wrong on a fundamental level. She reached into her glove compartment and pulled out her old ID badge from when she'd volunteered at the prison library. It had expired months ago, but in the dark, it might pass a quick inspection. She tucked it into her jacket pocket along with her father's letter, feeling their weight against her heart. The clock now read 7:51 p.m. Time was running out, each minute precious and irreplaceable. Taking a deep breath, she pulled her car into the shadows of an abandoned warehouse across from the prison. The execution chamber was in the east wing, past the main cell block and through 2 security checkpoints. She'd memorized the layout during her volunteer days, never imagining she'd need that knowledge like this, never thinking she'd be planning something so desperate. Her hands stopped shaking as determination replaced fear, steel entering her spine. Whatever the truth was, she would find it. She had to. Too much was at stake to give up now. The floodlights cast harsh shadows across Blackwood State Prison's imposing walls, the yellow beams cutting through the misty evening air like searchlights. Olivia's hands trembled on the steering wheel of her parked car, her breaths coming in short, sharp bursts that fogged the windshield. The stolen visitor pass felt like it was burning a hole in her pocket, a constant reminder of the line she was about to cross. She pulled the gray hoodie lower over her face, trying to calm her racing heart while watching guards patrol the perimeter. "Just breathe," she whispered to herself, checking her bag one last time with shaking fingers. The fake ID looked convincing enough in the dim light, though every imperfection now seemed glaringly obvious. The access codes she'd managed to obtain were scribbled on a crumpled piece of paper, each number and letter seared into her memory after countless rehearsals. Walking toward the main entrance, Olivia forced herself to move naturally, though her legs felt like lead weights dragging through quicksand. The first checkpoint loomed ahead, a burly guard with deep-set eyes stationed behind thick, bulletproof glass. She approached, willing her hand not to shake as she held up the stolen pass, praying the dim lighting would hide the fear she knew must be visible on her face. The guard barely glanced at it, waving her through with a bored expression. Relief flooded her system, but it was short-lived as cold sweat trickled down her spine. At the second checkpoint, a younger security officer with sharp eyes and a military haircut took the ID, studying it carefully under the fluorescent lights. "First time visiting?" he asked, his tone casual but his gaze suspicious as he looked between her face and the photo. Olivia managed a smile, though her heart was threatening to burst from her chest, its thundering so loud she was sure he must hear it. "No, I've been here before. Just nervous about the metal detectors, you know. They always make me jumpy." He stared at the ID for what felt like hours, turning it over in his hands. Olivia's palms grew sweaty, and she resisted the urge to wipe them on her jeans. Finally, he nodded and handed it back. "Go ahead." The maximum security wing was a maze of identical corridors, the fluorescent lights casting a sickly pallor over everything. Olivia followed the memorized route, her footsteps echoing off the cold concrete walls like accusations. Every camera she passed felt like an accusation, its red light blinking like a judgmental eye. Finally, she reached his cell tucked away in a corner of the building. Samuel lay on his narrow bunk, still wearing his faded blue prison jumpsuit, eyes fixed on the ceiling, as if searching for answers in the cracked paint. "Dad," she whispered urgently, her voice barely audible over the distant sounds of the prison. He turned his head slowly, his eyes widening in horror when he saw her standing there. "Olivia? What are you doing here? You can't be here." "We're getting you out," she hissed, reaching for the access panel beside his cell with trembling fingers. Samuel sat up, shaking his head firmly, his face etched with concern. "Number, you shouldn't be here. This isn't right. Think about Jacob. He needs his mother." Before Olivia could argue, a piercing alarm split the air, making her jump. Red lights began flashing throughout the corridor, bathing everything in an eerie crimson glow. Someone had discovered the breach. "Dad, please!" Olivia begged, desperation making her voice crack as tears threatened to spill. "We don't have time. I won't let them kill you." Samuel remained rooted to his bunk, his expression torn between love for his daughter and resignation to his fate. His hands gripped the thin mattress until his knuckles turned white. Olivia reached through the bars, grabbing his arm with surprising strength. "I won't let you die for something you didn't do. I can't lose you too." The sound of boots thundering down the corridor grew closer, accompanied by shouted orders. Olivia yanked her father's arm harder, finally forcing him to move. As guards rounded the corner, shots rang out, echoing off the walls like thunderclaps. Olivia and Samuel ran into the darkness, sirens wailing behind them like banshees in the night, their harsh sound promising retribution for their desperate gambit. The neon vacancy sign buzzed faintly outside the dingy motel window as Olivia and Samuel stumbled through the door of room 114. Their footsteps echoed on the worn carpet, both of them breathing heavily from their desperate escape. The room smelled of old cigarettes and cheap cleaning supplies, with a musty undertone that spoke of years of neglect, but it was their only refuge for now. Samuel sank onto the creaky bed, his prison uniform standing out starkly against the faded floral bedspread. He rubbed his wrists where the handcuffs had left angry red marks, his movements slow and deliberate. A thin line of dried blood traced the edge of one wrist. Olivia couldn't stop pacing, her shoes wearing a path between the door and the small window. The threadbare carpet barely muffled her footsteps. "I can't believe we actually did it," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Her hands were still shaking from the adrenaline, and her heart wouldn't stop racing. "But Dad, I need to know. Why did you let them arrest you if you were innocent? Why didn't you fight back?" Samuel's eyes, tired but alert, met hers. Dark circles beneath them testified to years of sleepless nights. Without a word, he reached into his prison uniform and pulled out a worn leather journal. The binding was cracked, the pages yellowed with age, and the corners were soft from countless readings. He held it out to her with steady hands. "Everything you need to know is in here," he said quietly, his voice rough from disuse. "Every name, every connection, every piece of evidence." Olivia grabbed the journal, her fingers trembling as she flipped through the pages. Her eyes widened as she saw detailed case files, carefully documented notes, and a list of names she didn't recognize. Some were circled in red ink, others crossed out. Dates, locations, and cryptic annotations filled the margins. The handwriting grew more desperate toward the final pages. A sharp knock at the door made her jump. The journal slipped from her hands, landing with a soft thud on the carpet. Olivia's hand instinctively moved to the gun at her waist, her heart pounding in her chest. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she crept toward the window, carefully pulling back the thin curtain. Her blood ran cold. Red and blue lights were approaching in the distance, their rotating beams cutting through the darkness like searching fingers. Multiple police cruisers, their engines growing louder by the second, were converging on the motel parking lot. "They found us," she whispered, her voice breaking. The weight of their situation crashed down on her shoulders. Behind her, Samuel let out a long, weary sigh. She turned to see him standing up, his shoulders straight despite everything. His face held a look of resignation she'd seen before, in the courtroom, in the prison cell. It was the look of a man who had already accepted his fate. "It's over, Liv," he said softly, each word heavy with regret. Before she could stop him, Samuel walked to the door. His hand reached for the handle, ready to surrender himself once again, while the sound of car doors slamming echoed through the night air. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the interrogation room, casting harsh shadows across Olivia's face. Her wrists throbbed where the metal handcuffs bit into her skin, but she kept her expression neutral as Detective Marcus Reed studied her from across the table. His cologne was too strong, making the already stuffy room feel even more suffocating. The stale coffee on his breath didn't help matters either. "That was a real stupid move breaking him out," Reed said, his smirk deepening the lines around his mouth. He tapped his pen against a manila folder, clearly enjoying having Samuel Hayes' daughter in custody. "You're looking at serious time, Olivia, but we can help each other." His eyes glinted with satisfaction as he watched her, like a cat toying with its prey. Olivia stared at a water stain on the wall, her jaw clenched tight. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of a response. The familiar taste of copper filled her mouth as she bit the inside of her cheek, fighting to maintain her composure. The silent treatment? Really? Reed leaned back in his chair, the metal legs scraping against the floor. "Your father is going back to death row. The only question is whether you'll be joining him in prison." He drummed his fingers on the table, waiting for her reaction. The door opened and Rachel Montgomery burst in, her heels clicking sharply on the tile floor. Her tailored suit and confident demeanor filled the small room with an air of authority. The scent of her jasmine perfume cut through Reed's overwhelming cologne. "This interview is over," Rachel announced, placing her briefcase on the table with a decisive thud. "My client is being released. The paperwork's already processed." Her voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. Reed's smirk faltered. "You can't just—" "I already did." Rachel's voice was steel. "Let's go, Olivia." She stood like a shield between Olivia and Reed, daring him to challenge her. The drive home was tense. Rachel gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. "You need to stop this, Liv. You're throwing your life away." The streetlights cast alternating shadows across her worried face. But Olivia barely heard her. Her mind was already on the journal hidden in her apartment, tucked away behind the loose baseboard under her bedroom window. Later that night, Olivia sat cross-legged on her bed, the leather-bound journal open in her lap. Her hands trembled as she turned each page, absorbing every detail her father had documented. Names, dates, locations, pieces of a puzzle she couldn't quite see. The faint scent of her father's aftershave still clung to the worn pages. Then her heart stopped. There it was, written in her father's precise handwriting, Ryan Carter. Her dead husband's name stared back at her, surrounded by notes and arrows connecting him to other names she didn't recognize. Olivia's throat tightened as she traced the letters with her finger. Ryan had died 2 years ago in what everyone said was a tragic accident. But here he was, woven into whatever conspiracy her father had uncovered. The bedside lamp cast a yellow glow over the pages, making the ink seem to shimmer like dark secrets coming to life. She gripped the journal so tight her knuckles turned white. The man she'd loved, the father of her child. What secrets had he been keeping? The Ryan she knew had been kind, honest, devoted to their family. But these pages told a different story, one that made her stomach churn with uncertainty. Their wedding photo smiled down at her from the dresser, now seeming more like a mask than a memory. The weight of betrayal pressed down on her chest as she stared at her husband's name, written in her father's hand. Everything she thought she knew about her life seemed to be unraveling, leaving her with nothing but questions and a growing sense of dread. In the next room, she could hear Jacob's soft breathing as he slept, unaware that his world was about to change forever. The abandoned warehouse loomed against the darkening sky, its broken windows like hollow eyes staring down at Olivia. She double-checked the address from her father's journal, her hands shaking slightly as she gripped the steering wheel. This was it. 4517 Industrial Way. The hulking structure had clearly been abandoned for years, its metal siding rusted and peeling away in sheets. The building's metal door creaked as she pushed it open, the sound echoing through the vast space. The smell of rust and old oil filled her nose, mixed with the musty scent of decay. "Hello?" Her voice echoed through the empty space, bouncing off concrete walls and steel beams. "Noah Lawson?" A shadow moved behind a stack of crates. A man stepped out, tall, thin, with graying hair and tired eyes that seemed to carry the weight of too many secrets. He wore a worn jacket with frayed cuffs and kept looking over his shoulder, his movements twitchy and nervous. "You shouldn't be here," Noah said, his voice barely above a whisper, rough with fear. "They're watching. They're always watching. Every phone call, every meeting. They know everything." Olivia pulled out Samuel's journal, its worn leather cover familiar in her hands. "I need to know the truth about my father's case." Noah's face went pale when he saw the journal, the color draining away until he looked almost ghostly in the dim light. He took a step back, shaking his head, his shoes scuffing against the concrete floor. "I can't, they'll kill me if I talk. You don't know what they're capable of." "People are already dying," Olivia pressed, moving closer, her heart pounding against her ribs. "My father is innocent, and someone powerful wants him dead. Please, I need your help." Noah's hands trembled as he wiped sweat from his forehead with a dirty handkerchief. "You don't understand what you're getting into. The whole department, it goes straight to the top. It's like a cancer that's spread everywhere." "What do you mean?" "Chief Lawson," Noah said, his voice cracking like thin ice. "He orchestrated everything, the evidence tampering, the witness intimidation. Your father discovered something he shouldn't have, something that would destroy them all." Olivia's breath caught in her throat, her mind reeling. Police Chief Richard Lawson, the most respected law enforcement officer in the state, the man who'd attended her wedding, who'd given speeches about integrity and justice, who'd looked her in the eye and promised to find the truth. "Chief Lawson runs a network of corrupt cops," Noah continued, constantly glancing at the windows where shadows seemed to shift and dance. "Your father was getting too close. The murder they pinned on him? It was a setup from the beginning. They planned every detail. Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I can't live with the guilt anymore." Noah pulled out an old photo from his pocket, creased and worn at the edges. "But you need to be careful. They're already watching you. They probably followed you here, they always do." Olivia felt a chill run down her spine, raising goosebumps on her arms. She turned toward the warehouse entrance, suddenly aware of how exposed they were in the cavernous space. "Take this." Noah pressed a USB drive into her palm, the metal warm from being carried close to his body. "It's everything I managed to save before I left the force. Files, recordings, photos, Evidence they thought they'd destroyed. But you didn't get it from me. I was never here. Do you understand? He hurried toward a back exit, his footsteps echoing, pausing one last time in a shaft of dying sunlight. Your father was right about everything. But that's what got him into trouble in the first place. The truth is dangerous in this town. As Olivia walked back to her car, the weight of the USB drive felt heavy in her pocket, like it carried the weight of all the secrets it contained. The parking lot was empty, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of invisible eyes tracking her every move. Movement caught her eye. A reflection in her car's side mirror, a flash of something in the growing darkness. Someone was definitely there, hidden in the shadows between the buildings, watching and waiting. The dim lamplight cast long shadows across Olivia's living room as she sat cross-legged on her couch, her father's worn leather journal open in her lap. The pages were yellowed with age, filled with memories and secrets she was only beginning to understand. Her eyes kept returning to Ryan's name, written in her father's neat, precise handwriting. What connection could her dead husband have to all of this? The question gnawed at her mind like a persistent ache. A sharp knock made her jump, the journal nearly sliding from her lap. Through the peephole, she saw Rachel standing there, fidgeting with her purse strap, her face drawn with worry. Olivia's hand hovered over the doorknob for a moment before she opened it, her instincts warning her that something wasn't right. "Hey," Rachel said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes, her usual warmth notably absent. "Can I come in?" Olivia stepped aside, watching her friend closely as she entered. Rachel's usual confident stride was missing, replaced by hesitant steps that seemed to carry the weight of unspoken words. "You shouldn't be doing this, Liv," Rachel said, perching on the edge of the armchair like a bird ready to take flight. Her fingers drummed nervously against her knee, creating a rhythm of anxiety. "These people you're investigating, they're dangerous. Think about Jacob, please." "I am thinking about Jacob," Olivia replied, noting how Rachel's hands trembled slightly, betraying her fear. "I'm thinking about what kind of world he'll grow up in if people like this keep getting away with their crimes. He deserves better than that." Rachel's eyes darted around the room, never settling in one place like a trapped animal searching for escape. "Please, just drop it. Move on. Start fresh somewhere else. There are other places, safer places." "Why do you care so much?" Olivia asked, her voice hardening as suspicion crept in. "What aren't you telling me, Rachel?" I just want you safe," Rachel stammered, standing up abruptly, her purse clutched to her chest like a shield. "You're my best friend. Is that so hard to believe?" "The Rachel I know would be helping me fight for justice," Olivia said quietly, hurt seeping into her words. "Not telling me to run away." Rachel grabbed her purse, heading for the door with quick, desperate steps. "Maybe you don't know me as well as you think." She left without looking back, the door closing behind her with a final sounding click. Olivia stood in the silence of her apartment, her mind racing through years of friendship, searching for signs she might have missed. The doorbell rang again, making her heart skip painfully in her chest. She approached cautiously but saw no one through the peephole. Opening the door slowly, her hand trembling slightly, she found a manila envelope on her welcome mat. With shaking hands, she tore it open, dread building in her stomach. A Polaroid photo slipped out, and Olivia's world stopped spinning, her breath catching in her throat. Jacob, her beautiful boy, bound and gagged, terror in his young eyes. His school uniform was wrinkled, his hair disheveled. The note attached was typed in bold letters, each word a hammer blow to her heart. "Tell the truth, and he dies." The photo slipped from her numb fingers as she collapsed against the wall, a silent scream building in her throat, her worst nightmare made real in one terrible moment. Olivia's legs gave out as she stared at the photo of Jacob. Her baby boy's terrified eyes looked back at her, a dirty cloth tied around his mouth, his cheeks wet with tears. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the picture, her fingers leaving smudges on its glossy surface. The room spun around her as she fought to breathe, her chest tight with a panic unlike anything she'd ever known. "No, no, no," she whispered, pressing her forehead against the cold hardwood floor. This couldn't be happening. Not Jacob. Not her sweet, innocent child, who still slept with his favorite stuffed penguin. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, displaying a blocked number. She grabbed it, her trembling fingers nearly dropping it twice before she could answer. "Hello?" Her voice cracked, raw with fear. "You've been warned," a distorted voice said, metallic and inhuman. "This is your last chance. Stop now, or Jacob disappears forever." "Where is he?" Olivia demanded, her voice rising with panic. Her free hand clutched at her throat, trying to keep the terror from choking her. "Let me talk to him. Please, he's just a child." The line went dead with a harsh click that echoed in her ear. Olivia stared at her phone, her mind racing through terrible possibilities. The police were supposed to help in situations like this, but they were the ones behind it all. The same corrupt system that had framed her father now had her son, and the thought made her stomach twist with rage and fear. She quickly dialed Rachel's number, praying her friend would answer. Each ring felt like an eternity before the call went straight to voicemail. "Rachel, please," Olivia sobbed into the phone, her words catching in her throat. "They took Jacob. I need help." She stopped mid-sentence, a cold realization washing over her like ice water. Rachel's strange behavior earlier, her insistence that Olivia stop investigating, the way her hands had trembled when they'd last spoken, the nervous glances toward her phone. Rachel knew. She had to have known this was coming. Olivia's tears dried as a different emotion took over, pure, burning determination that heated her blood and steadied her hands. She pushed herself up from the floor, her fingers curling into tight fists. These people had taken everything from her, her father's freedom, her husband's truth, and now her son. She wouldn't let them win. She couldn't. Not when Jacob needed her more than ever. Looking down at Jacob's photo one more time, Olivia's jaw clenched until her teeth ached. She would tear apart every corrupt cop, every lying official, every single person involved until she found her son. She would start with Chief Lawson and work her way down through his whole rotten department if she had to. No threat would stop her. No danger would turn her back. She would do whatever it took to bring Jacob home. The neon sign of Jerry's Diner flickered weakly in the darkness, casting an eerie red glow across Olivia's face as she sat in her parked car. Her stomach churned with a mix of fear and rage, making her feel physically ill. The burner phone she'd bought that morning lay silent on the passenger seat, mocking her with its presence. She'd chosen this spot carefully, isolated enough for privacy, but public enough that she wouldn't be an easy target. When it finally rang, the harsh sound made her jump, her heart leaping into her throat. She snatched it up, her throat tight with anticipation. "Where is he?" she demanded, not bothering with pleasantries. Her voice came out stronger than she felt. "You made your choice." The voice was cold, mechanical, clearly disguised by some kind of device. It sent chills down her spine and made her skin crawl with revulsion. "Where is my son?" Olivia's voice cracked with desperation. Her free hand clenched into a fist, nails digging into her palm. A low chuckle came through the speaker. "You're not in control here." The voice paused for effect, savoring her fear. "But maybe you should think about what's more important. Justice or Jacob?" Olivia's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her wedding ring clinked against the worn leather as her whole body trembled with fury. The sound brought back memories of happier times, making this moment even more bitter. "If you hurt him," she started, barely containing her rage. "You'll what?" the voice taunted. "Go to the police?" "Oh wait, you can't, can you? Because they're the ones you're fighting against." Another cold laugh echoed through the speaker. "Face it, Ms. Hayes. You're alone. No one is coming to help you." Tears of frustration burned in Olivia's eyes, blurring her vision. "He's just a child," she whispered, her mother's heart breaking. "Then make the right choice. Drop the investigation. Stop digging into things that don't concern you. Walk away, and Jacob comes home safe." The words dripped with smug confidence. Olivia's jaw clenched so hard it hurt. "And my father? Some sacrifices are necessary. Surely your son's life is worth more than your father's revenge fantasy." The words were delivered with casual disdain. The casual cruelty in those words made her blood boil. These people had taken everything from her: her father's freedom, her husband's life, and now her son. They expected her to just give up, to let them win. The injustice of it all threatened to overwhelm her. "You have 1 hour to decide," the voice continued, dripping with false sympathy. "Choose wisely." The line went dead with a definitive click. Olivia stared at the phone for a long moment before hurling it against the dashboard with a cry of rage. It bounced off and landed at her feet, screen cracked but still intact, much like her resolve. Her hand moved to the glove compartment, fingers wrapping around the cold metal of her gun. She pulled it out slowly, checking the magazine with practiced movements that her husband had taught her years ago. If they thought they could threaten her child and walk away, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. A mother's love could be the deadliest force in the world. The abandoned warehouse district loomed ahead like a graveyard of rust and broken dreams, its skeletal structures casting long shadows in the fading light. Olivia parked her car behind a pile of discarded shipping containers, her hands steady as she checked her gun one last time, methodically running through the safety checks Noah had drilled into her. The journal's cryptic clues and Noah's whispered directions had led her here, where Jacob's kidnappers were holding her little boy, her whole world. Broken glass crunched under her feet as she crept toward the main building, every step calculated and precise. The streetlights were mostly shattered, leaving only patches of sickly yellow light that created deceptive shadows. Her heart pounded against her ribs, but her mind stayed sharp, focused, just as her father had taught her all those years ago. Inside, the warehouse was a maze of metal and shadows, the air thick with decades of abandonment. The musty air caught in her throat as she moved silently between towering containers, their rusted surfaces telling stories of forgotten commerce. Then she heard it. A small, frightened whimper that could only be Jacob, the sound piercing her heart like a knife. 2 guards stood near a metal staircase, their police-issue weapons visible under their ill-fitting jackets. Olivia moved like a ghost, taking them down with quick strikes to the pressure points Noah had taught her about, her movements fluid and precise. But as she dragged the second guard behind a crate, gunfire exploded through the warehouse, shattering the eerie silence. Bullets pinged off metal as Olivia dove behind a container, her shoulder scraping against the rough surface. She returned fire, her shots echoing in the vast space like thunder. Her phone buzzed against her hip, Rachel's name flashing on the screen, a beacon in the darkness. "Liv?" Rachel's voice cracked with tears, heavy with guilt. "I know where they're keeping him. I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. God, I never wanted this." "What are you talking about?" Olivia demanded, ducking as more bullets whizzed past, close enough to feel their heat. "I've been telling them everything, about your investigation, your moves, every step you've taken. But I swear I didn't know they'd take Jacob. Please, you have to believe me. I thought I was protecting everyone." Olivia's world tilted sideways, the betrayal hitting harder than any bullet could. Rachel, her best friend since childhood, the woman who'd held her hand at Mark's funeral, had betrayed her, had helped these monsters target her family. "He's in the foreman's office, 2nd floor," Rachel sobbed, desperation clear in her voice. "Please, let me help make this right. I can't live with what I've done." Olivia ended the call, her mind racing through possibilities and consequences. Could she trust Rachel's information? Did she have a choice when her son's life hung in the balance? More gunfire forced her decision, the bullets creating a deadly rhythm in the darkness. She sprinted toward the stairs, shooting back at the shadows where muzzle flashes betrayed her attackers' positions. Her feet pounded up the metal steps as bullets sparked around her, each step bringing her closer to Jacob. The foreman's office door was locked, its frosted glass window clouded with years of grime. Olivia kicked it open, her gun ready, maternal instinct driving her forward. Jacob sat tied to a chair, tears streaming down his dirty face, his clothes rumpled and dusty. When he saw her, his eyes lit up with hope, that special bond between mother and son transcending the horror of the moment. "Mom!" he cried through his gag, the word muffled but filled with relief. Olivia dropped to her knees beside him, hands shaking as she worked at the ropes binding her precious boy. Tears blurred her vision as she pulled the gag from his mouth and wrapped him in her arms, breathing in his familiar scent. He clung to her, his small body trembling against hers, his fingers digging into her jacket. The distinct sound of a gun being cocked froze them both in place, the metallic click echoing like a death knell in the small office. The cold metal of a gun barrel pressed against Olivia's back, making her blood run cold. She kept her body firmly planted in front of Jacob, who was trembling behind her, his small fingers clutching desperately at her jacket. "You should have listened," a gruff voice snarled, pressing the weapon harder against her spine. Before the corrupt officer could say another word, police sirens pierced the air. Red and blue lights flooded through the warehouse windows, casting eerie shadows across the concrete floor and illuminating the dust particles swirling in the stale air. The officer's grip on his weapon faltered for just a moment, his confidence cracking. "FBI! Everyone on the ground!" The shout echoed through the warehouse as dozens of federal agents burst through every entrance, weapons raised, their tactical gear gleaming under the harsh emergency lights. Olivia dropped to the floor, pulling Jacob down with her and covering his small body with her own. Gunfire erupted above them, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Shell casings clinked against concrete as Jacob pressed his face into her shoulder, his tears soaking through her shirt, his whole body shaking. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, holding him tight and stroking his hair. "Keep your eyes closed. Mommy's got you." Through the chaos, she caught sight of Police Chief Richard Lawson making a break for a side door. His face was twisted in panic as he shoved aside boxes and equipment, his usual composed demeanor completely shattered. An FBI agent spotted him and gave chase, tackling him just as he reached the exit. Lawson's head hit the concrete with a dull thud, and the agent quickly secured his hands behind his back with metallic handcuffs that gleamed in the strobing lights. Rachel appeared from behind a stack of crates, her face streaked with blood from a cut above her eye, her blonde hair matted with sweat and grime. She walked straight to the FBI's lead agent, her voice shaking but clear, determination evident in every step. "He gave the orders," she said, pointing at Lawson. "The chief orchestrated everything. Samuel Hayes' false conviction, the cover-up, Jacob's kidnapping. I have proof. Documents, recordings, everything." Lawson thrashed against his restraints as two agents hauled him to his feet, his expensive suit now covered in dust and torn at the shoulder. "You lying little..." His words were cut off as they dragged him toward the exit, his polished shoes scuffing against the floor. The warehouse was quickly secured, with several corrupt officers in custody. Medical teams rushed in to check on Jacob while FBI agents documented the scene, photographing evidence and marking shell casings. Rachel stood apart from everyone, watching as Lawson was roughly shoved into the back of an FBI vehicle, his final shreds of dignity stripped away. She approached Olivia slowly, her voice barely above a whisper, guilt etched across her features. "I hope this makes up for it." Olivia didn't respond. She kept her arms wrapped protectively around Jacob, watching the flashing lights reflect off the warehouse walls, her hands still trembling from everything they'd endured. The nightmare was finally ending, but the memory of this night would stay with them forever. The autumn breeze rustled through the park's trees, scattering golden leaves across the ground like nature's confetti. Olivia sat on a weathered wooden bench, its green paint peeling at the edges, her eyes fixed on Jacob as he pumped his legs back and forth on the swing set. His laughter carried across the playground, a sound that made her heart both soar and ache. Just yesterday, she'd thought she might never hear that sound again, might never see his face light up with such pure joy. Footsteps crunched on fallen leaves behind her. Olivia didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Rachel stood there for a long moment, shifting her weight from foot to foot, her shadow stretching across the ground like a dark reminder of their broken friendship, before slowly lowering herself onto the far end of the bench. Neither woman spoke at first. The only sounds were Jacob's delighted squeals and the creaking of swing chains, a rhythmic symphony of childhood innocence. "I don't even know where to start," Rachel finally whispered, her voice cracking like thin ice. She wrung her hands in her lap, staring down at them as if they held the answers she sought. "I've rehearsed this conversation 100 times in my head, but nothing sounds right." Olivia remained silent, giving Rachel space to continue, her own hands clasped tightly in her lap. "The police chief," Rachel's voice trembled like a leaf in the wind. "He approached me 6 months ago. He had fabricated evidence linking your father to another murder. Said if I didn't help them keep tabs on you, they'd use it." She wiped at her eyes with shaking hands, smudging her makeup further. I really thought I was protecting you both. If they knew what you were doing, I could warn you, keep you safe." "But you were just helping them stay one step ahead," Olivia said quietly, each word measured and heavy with disappointment. Rachel nodded, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks like morning dew. "I never wanted Jacob to get hurt. When they took him, I swear, Liv, I didn't know they would go that far. I was stupid and scared and—" She choked back a sob that seemed to come from deep within. "I thought I was doing the right thing, but I just made everything worse." Olivia watched Jacob jump off the swing, landing in a pile of leaves with childish abandon. He emerged giggling, his hair full of fragments of orange and red, looking like autumn itself had embraced him. "You were my best friend, Rachel," Olivia said, emphasizing the past tense with quiet firmness. "We grew up together. You were there when Ryan died. You held my hand through everything. And all this time—" "I know," Rachel whispered, the words barely audible above the rustling leaves. "I know, and I'll hate myself forever for betraying that trust. Is there any way you could ever forgive me?" Olivia finally turned to look at her childhood friend. Rachel's mascara was smeared, her eyes red and puffy, dark circles beneath them telling tales of sleepless nights. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, worn down by the weight of her guilt. After a long moment, Olivia spoke carefully, choosing her words with deliberate precision. "I don't know if I can forgive you today, but maybe one day." Rachel nodded, accepting this small glimmer of possibility with visible relief. It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't a complete rejection either. Sometimes, she realized, maybe was the kindest answer possible. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Olivia walked through the familiar prison corridor, her footsteps echoing against the concrete floors. Her steps were lighter now, her shoulders no longer weighed down by desperation. Even the musty prison air felt different somehow. The guard unlocked the heavy metal door to the visitor's room with a metallic clang, and there sat Samuel, wearing the same calm expression he always had, his prison uniform crisp and neat. "Dad," Olivia said, her voice trembling with joy as she sat down across from him, her hands clasped tightly together to stop them from shaking. "We did it. The FBI has Chief Lawson in custody. They're going through all the evidence right now. Every single file, every document." Samuel nodded slowly, a small smile crossing his weathered face, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "I knew you'd find the truth, Liv. You always were unstoppable when you set your mind to something. The FBI agent said your case will be officially overturned by next week." Olivia leaned forward, her eyes bright with hope, practically bouncing in her seat. "You'll be free, Dad. You can come home. Jacob's so excited to have his grandpa back." But Samuel's expression changed, becoming more serious. His jaw set in that familiar way that told Olivia he'd made up his mind about something. "I'm not leaving." Olivia blinked, certain she had misheard, her smile faltering. "What? Dad? You don't have to do this. You're a free man. We fought so hard for this." "Listen to me, Liv." Samuel's voice was gentle but firm, his hands folded carefully on the metal table between them. "While I've been in here, I've met dozens of men just like me. Good people, wrongfully accused without anyone to fight for them. No daughter brave enough to risk everything. No evidence hidden away in journals. Some of them have been here twice as long as I have." "But that's not your responsibility," Olivia protested, her hands gripping the edge of the metal table until her knuckles turned white. The cold steel bit into her palms. "If I walk out of here while others rot, what does that make me?" Samuel's eyes held a fierce determination, the same look she'd seen in the mirror countless times during her fight for his freedom. "I won't accept freedom until every innocent man inside these walls gets a fair trial. This was never just about me. It was about justice." Olivia sat back, tears welling in her eyes, her throat tight with emotion. This was so like her father, always thinking of others, always fighting for what was right, even at his own expense, just as he'd taught her to be. "The system is broken, Liv," Samuel continued, leaning forward slightly, his voice dropping to ensure only she could hear. "And now that we've exposed one corrupt official, we have a chance to fix it. But I can do more good in here than out there. These men need someone who understands, someone who can help them fight, someone who knows the truth about what goes on behind these walls." A guard appeared at the door, jangling his keys impatiently, signaling their time was up. Samuel stood, his chains rattling against the floor. "Dad." Olivia's voice cracked, a tear finally spilling down her cheek. "I'm proud of you, Liv. More than you'll ever know." He gave her one last smile as the guard led him away, back to his cell, this time by choice. His shoulders were straight, his head held high. Olivia watched him go, her heart heavy with a mixture of pride and sadness, wiping away her tears with trembling fingers. Her father was finally free to leave, but his conscience wouldn't let him. She realized then that this was just the beginning of a much bigger fight. The truth about Chief Lawson was only the first domino to fall. Sunlight streamed through the windows of Olivia's new office, casting warm rectangles across the polished wooden desk. The space wasn't large, but it felt like home. Walls lined with legal books, a comfortable reading corner where Jacob sat cross-legged with his favorite dinosaur book, and neat stacks of case files covering every surface. A small potted plant by the window, a gift from her father, added a touch of life to the professional setting. "Mom, look at this one!" Jacob called out, holding up his book to show a picture of a T-Rex. His eyes sparkled with excitement, no trace of the trauma from weeks ago visible on his young face. He pointed eagerly at the detailed illustration, his finger tracing the dinosaur's sharp teeth. Olivia smiled, her heart swelling with love and gratitude. "That's amazing, sweetheart." She turned back to the stack of papers in front of her. The official registration documents for the Hayes Foundation for Wrongful Convictions. The fresh ink on the letterhead made it all feel real, a dream finally taking shape. The morning mail cart squeaked past her door and the intern Tommy dropped off a small pile of letters. His cheerful, "Good morning, Mrs. Hayes," brightened the room. Most were typical: requests for information, support letters, legal correspondence. But one envelope stood out. The handwriting was careful, deliberate, written in blue prison-issued ink. Olivia opened it carefully, unfolding the lined paper inside. "Dear Mrs. Hayes, my name is Maria Velasquez. I've been imprisoned at Bedford Hills for 7 years for a murder I didn't commit. I read about your father's case in the newspaper. Please, I need your help. The evidence they used against me was fabricated, just like in your father's case. The same detective who testified against your father was involved in my arrest." Olivia's hands trembled slightly as she read further, her coffee growing cold beside her. The similarities were striking. Tampered evidence, coerced witnesses, a rushed trial. Her throat tightened as she recognized the familiar pattern of corruption. Jacob looked up from his book, noticing his mother's expression. "Are you okay, Mom?" His small voice carried the wisdom of someone who had seen too much too young. "Yes, sweetie," Olivia said, managing a reassuring smile. "Someone needs our help, that's all." She reached over to ruffle his hair gently. She looked around her office, at the Justice for All poster she'd hung on the wall, at the framed photo of her father still sitting in his prison cell by choice, fighting for others' freedom before his own. A stack of newspaper clippings about his case sat in a neat pile on her credenza. The foundation wasn't just about clearing Samuel's name anymore. It was about all the Maria Velasquezes out there, trapped behind bars while truth gathered dust in forgotten evidence boxes. Olivia reached for her phone, already knowing this would be the first of many such cases. Her fingers dialed the number she now knew by heart, her contact at the Innocence Project, who had helped with her father's case. The morning sun caught the simple gold band she still wore, a reminder of everything that had brought her to this moment. As the phone rang, she watched Jacob turn another page in his book, safe and secure in his corner of her office. He was growing up watching his mother fight for what was right, learning that sometimes the hardest battles were the ones most worth fighting. His presence gave her strength, reminding her why she had chosen this path. The line clicked as someone picked up. "This is Olivia Hayes from the Hayes Foundation," she said, her voice steady and determined. "I have a case I need to discuss with you." The courtroom buzzed with nervous energy as Olivia stood before Judge Carter Wells, her heart pounding but her voice steady. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors. The ancient radiators clanked softly in the background, a rhythmic counterpoint to the tension in the room. Maria Velázquez sat quietly in her orange jumpsuit, her dark eyes fixed on Olivia with a mixture of hope and fear, her hands fidgeting slightly in her lap. "Your Honor," Olivia began, spreading her carefully organized documents across the podium. Her fingers brushed over each page with practiced familiarity. "The prosecution's case rests entirely on circumstantial evidence. Ms. Velázquez was indeed near the crime scene, but so were dozens of other people in that busy shopping district. We have statements from 17 witnesses confirming the crowded conditions that day." The prosecutor, a sharp-featured man named Davidson, interrupted, half rising from his chair. "She was found with the victim's blood on her clothes." His voice carried a note of smug certainty that made Olivia's jaw clench. "Transfer evidence," Olivia countered, holding up a photograph, her voice gaining strength. "Ms. Velázquez was the one who tried to help the victim after finding him. Her immediate call to 911 is documented. The real killer counted on someone else being blamed. The blood spatter analysis we've submitted proves she wasn't present during the actual attack." From the back row, Samuel Hayes watched intently, his weathered hands clasped together so tightly his knuckles showed white. His presence gave Olivia strength, even though he still wore his prison uniform. He'd refused his own freedom, but here he was, supporting her fight for others, his eyes never leaving his daughter's face. Judge Wells leaned forward, adjusting his glasses with deliberate care. "Ms. Hayes, while your arguments are compelling, overturning a conviction requires extraordinary evidence." His tone was measured, but there was a hint of interest in his eyes that gave Olivia hope. "Which is exactly what we have, Your Honor." Olivia pulled out security camera footage with steady hands. "This video shows another figure leaving the scene 8 minutes before Ms. Velázquez arrived. The original defense never received this footage. Our enhancement analysis shows distinctive features that directly contradict the prosecution's timeline." The judge studied the grainy images, his brow furrowed, the courtroom so quiet you could hear the tick of the wall clock. After what felt like hours, he looked up, removing his glasses and placing them carefully on his desk. "This case clearly needs further review. I'm ordering a full investigation into this new evidence. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks." Maria's shoulders slumped, not in defeat but in relief. Someone was finally listening. Tears gathered in her eyes, but she blinked them back, managing a small, grateful smile at Olivia. After the court cleared out, Olivia found herself sitting on the courthouse steps beside her father. The afternoon sun was warm on their faces, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming cherry trees. A few pink petals drifted past them, dancing on the air. "What if I can't do this, Dad?" Olivia whispered, her confidence wavering now that the adrenaline had worn off. She ran her fingers through her hair, a nervous habit she'd never quite broken. Samuel's hand found hers, his grip firm and reassuring. The familiar calluses on his palm reminded her of childhood comfort. "You already are," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of experience and the lightness of pride. Olivia pushed open the glass door of her new office, pausing to run her fingers over the freshly painted letters. The Hayes Foundation for Justice. The space hummed with purposeful energy, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, and the shuffle of papers as her small but dedicated team worked tirelessly. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow over the bustling workspace. 3 interns huddled around a computer, reviewing security footage for their latest case, their faces intense with concentration. A paralegal named Sarah waved from her desk, juggling 2 phone calls at once, her free hand frantically scribbling notes. The walls, still bare except for a single framed photo of Samuel, waited to be filled with success stories, testimonies of lives changed and justice restored. "Ms. Hayes," called out Tom, one of the volunteers, his voice carrying across the office. "Judge Reynolds is on line 2. He says it's urgent." He held the phone expectantly, his expression conveying the call's importance. Olivia picked up the phone at her desk, straightening her blazer out of habit. The familiar gesture helped center her thoughts. "This is Olivia Hayes." "Ms. Hayes," Judge Reynolds' deep voice carried authority even through the phone line. "I've been following your work, particularly the Velasquez case. Very impressive." His words held genuine admiration. "Thank you, Your Honor. I have a case that needs your attention. Robert Langston. He's been on death row for 15 years. His final appeal is coming up next month." The judge paused, his voice heavy with concern. "The evidence against him never sat right with me, but my hands were tied during the original trial." Olivia grabbed a notepad, her hand hovering over it, her heart already racing with the familiar surge of determination. Through her office window, she could see Samuel sitting in the conference room, reviewing cases with 2 other former inmates who now volunteered at the foundation. Their presence was a testament to second chances. He looked up, catching her eye, his expression knowing. "Would you be willing to take this case?" Judge Reynolds asked, urgency creeping into his tone. "Time is running out for Langston." Olivia watched her father, remembering how close she'd come to losing him. The memory still sent chills down her spine. She thought of all the others still waiting for someone to fight for them, trapped behind bars with hope slipping away. "Of course, Your Honor, send over everything you have." Samuel nodded slightly, a small smile of approval crossing his face. His eyes held the weight of experience. He understood better than anyone what this meant. Another chance to right a wrong, to save someone before it was too late. "The files will be there within the hour," Judge Reynolds said, relief evident in his voice. "And Ms. Hayes, thank you." Olivia hung up and walked to her filing cabinet, pulling out a fresh folder. The metal drawer squeaked slightly. They were still settling into the new office. She wrote, "Langston Robert," across the tab in bold letters, her handwriting steady and determined. Another life in her hands. Another fight for justice about to begin. Through her window, she watched Samuel showing the volunteers how to spot inconsistencies in police reports, his fingers tracing lines on the documents as he explained. He caught her eye again and gave her a thumbs up, his gesture full of pride and encouragement. They both knew. This was exactly where they were meant to be, doing the work that mattered most. The courier arrived 30 minutes later with Robert Langston's file, a thick stack of documents that could mean the difference between life and death. The manila envelope landed on her desk with a weighty thud. Olivia set it on her desk, took a deep breath, and opened the cover. The familiar scent of paper and ink filled her nostrils as she began her search for the truth hidden within. The courtroom buzzed with nervous energy as Judge Carter Wells adjusted his reading glasses, studying the new evidence spread across his bench. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floors. Olivia sat beside Maria Velasquez, who twisted her hands in her lap, her orange jumpsuit a stark reminder of 3 years lost behind bars. The fabric rustled with each anxious movement. After reviewing the newly presented evidence, Judge Wells began, his voice cutting through the tension, particularly the witness testimony that was inexplicably overlooked during the initial trial. He paused, shuffling through the papers before him with deliberate care. Olivia reached over and squeezed Maria's trembling hand. The young woman's dark eyes were fixed on the judge, barely breathing. A bead of sweat trickled down her temple. Judge Wells continued, his tone measured and clear. The witness testimony provided by Mr. James Rodriguez clearly places Ms. Velasquez at her workplace during the time of the murder. This alibi was never presented to the original jury. The oversight is deeply troubling. Tears began rolling down Maria's cheeks, leaving glistening trails on her face. Olivia's heart pounded against her ribs so hard she thought everyone must hear it. Furthermore, the judge added, leaning forward slightly in his chair, the DNA evidence that supposedly linked Ms. Velasquez to the crime scene has been proven unreliable through new testing methods. He removed his glasses, looking directly at Maria with kind eyes. In light of these findings, this court hereby overturns the conviction of Maria Velasquez in the murder of David Thompson. The gavel struck with a sharp crack that echoed through the chamber. Maria's legs gave out, and she collapsed into her chair, sobbing uncontrollably. Olivia wrapped her arms around her client's shoulders, her own eyes burning with tears of relief and triumph. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Reporters jumped to their feet, cameras flashing like lightning in a summer storm. Maria's family in the gallery broke into loud cries of joy, her mother crossing herself repeatedly while clutching her worn wooden rosary, its beads smooth from years of prayers. "Order! Order in the court!" Judge Wells commanded, but his voice held a note of satisfaction. His eyes crinkled at the corners despite his stern expression. Guards approached with keys jingling at their belts to remove Maria's handcuffs for the last time. The metal clinked as they fell away, and Maria rubbed her wrists, still crying, looking at the red marks that would soon fade. "You're free," Olivia whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "It's over." Reporters swarmed as they exited the courtroom into the marble hallway, microphones thrust forward like eager arms, questions flying from all directions, voices overlapping in their urgency. "Ms. Hayes, how does it feel to win your first wrongful conviction case? Ms. Velasquez, what are your plans now? Will the Hayes Foundation take on more cases like this?" Maria hugged her family while Olivia fielded questions, keeping her composure despite her racing heart and trembling hands. A reporter from the local news station pushed forward, her red blazer bright in the crowd. "Ms. Hayes, what's next for you?" Olivia looked at Maria embracing her mother, their tears of joy mingling, then back at the reporter. She smiled, feeling the weight of her father's legacy and her own growing purpose settle firmly on her shoulders. "Whoever needs me," she replied simply, her voice steady and sure. The answer seemed to ripple through the crowd like waves on still water. Cameras flashed again, capturing the moment when Olivia Hayes stepped fully into her new role as a defender of the wrongfully convicted, her path now crystal clear before her. The grand ballroom of the Meridian Hotel sparkled with camera flashes as Olivia Hayes stepped onto the stage. Her simple black dress and pearl necklace stood in stark contrast to the ornate decorations surrounding her. Hundreds of faces looked up at her, judges, lawyers, activists, and reporters, all gathered for the National Criminal Justice Reform Conference. Olivia's heart raced as she approached the podium, the crystal sculpture of Lady Justice catching the light and casting prisms across her notes. Supreme Court Justice Margaret Chen smiled warmly as she presented the award to Olivia. For her groundbreaking work in overturning wrongful convictions and establishing the Hayes Foundation for Justice, we honor Olivia Hayes with this year's Excellence in Criminal Justice Reform Award. The thunderous applause filled the ballroom as Olivia gripped the edges of the podium, taking a deep breath. Her eyes scanned the crowd, seasoned attorneys who had once dismissed her, judges who now sought her counsel, and young law students who looked to her with hope. 3 years ago, Olivia began, her voice steady despite her nerves, I sat in a courtroom and watched my father being sentenced to death for a crime he didn't commit. Today I stand before you not just as his daughter, but as someone who has seen firsthand how our system can fail us. The room fell silent, captivated by her words. Justice isn't about punishment, it's about truth. And for too long, we've failed to seek the truth. Her voice grew stronger with each word. We've confused vengeance with justice, certainty with fact, and convenience with righteousness. The crowd erupted in applause, many rising to their feet. As Olivia stood there, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She discreetly checked it, a message from her father, Samuel, that filled her with pride. "You did it, Liv," he wrote. "You're changing the world." Tears pricked at Olivia's eyes as she slipped the phone back into her pocket. Looking out at the standing ovation, she saw not just applause, but a movement she had helped create. She saw not just faces, but stories waiting to be heard, lives waiting to be saved. The Crystal Award caught the light again, reminding Olivia of all the tears, sleepless nights, and countless hours that had led to this moment. But more importantly, it reminded her of every person still waiting behind bars, hoping someone would fight for their truth. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Olivia's footsteps echoed through Blackwood State Prison's stark corridors. Each gate closed behind her with a familiar metallic clang that still made her flinch. The guard nodded at her. They all knew her face by now. Her heart beat faster as she approached the visitation room. Samuel had specifically requested this meeting, which was unusual. When she entered, he sat at the metal table, hands folded calmly in front of him. His prison uniform was as neat as ever, his expression peaceful but determined. "Hi, Dad," Olivia said softly, settling into the hard plastic chair across from him. Without a word, Samuel reached into a manila envelope and pulled out a thick stack of papers. He slid them across the table, the sound of paper against metal filling the quiet room. Olivia's breath caught as she read the first page. "A clemency request?" Her voice trembled. "But you told me you weren't leaving." Samuel's eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled. "I wasn't going to leave until I knew the system could change." He reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Thanks to you, it already has." Olivia's hands shook as she flipped through the documents. Her eyes widened as she realized what she was seeing. "Dad, these aren't just your papers." "No," Samuel confirmed. "There are 10 other men in here, all innocent, all with solid evidence to prove it." He leaned forward. "I won't walk out those gates alone, Olivia, but it's time to start the process." Tears blurred Olivia's vision as she stared at the papers. Each page represented a life put on hold, a family torn apart, a justice system that had failed. But now, finally, there was hope. "Where do I sign?" she asked, pulling out her pen. Samuel pointed to the marked spaces, watching as his daughter's signature joined his own. Each stroke of her pen brought them one step closer to freedom, not just for him, but for others who had lost everything to wrongful convictions. When she finished, Olivia carefully arranged the papers back into their envelope. Her hands were steady now, her purpose clear. The wheels of justice were finally turning in the right direction. The morning sun cast long shadows across the prison parking lot as Olivia stood with Jacob, their hands clasped tightly together. Blackwood State Prison's imposing walls loomed before them, a sight that had haunted Olivia's nightmares for years, but today was different. Today, those walls would release their hold on Samuel Hayes. Jacob shifted nervously beside her, his small hand squeezing hers. "Mom, is Grandpa really coming out?" "Yes, sweetie," Olivia whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "He's finally coming home." The gathered news crews kept their distance, but their cameras were already rolling. Olivia could hear their whispered commentary and the click of photography equipment. She ignored them, focusing instead on the massive metal gates ahead. A loud buzzer sounded and the gates began to slide open with a grinding screech. Samuel Hayes stepped out into the morning light, carrying a small box of belongings. He raised his hand to shield his eyes from the bright sunlight, blinking as he adjusted to the natural light. Olivia couldn't hold back anymore. Tears streamed down her face as she rushed forward, pulling her father into a tight embrace. Samuel dropped the box, wrapping his arms around his daughter, his own eyes glistening. "Dad," she sobbed into his shoulder. "You're really here." The reporters surged forward, shoving microphones and calling out questions. "Mr. Hayes, how does it feel to be exonerated? What are your plans now? Do you harbor any resentment?" Olivia turned toward them, raising her hand in a firm gesture for silence. This moment wasn't for their headlines or their ratings. This was for her family. Samuel gently broke away from Olivia and knelt down in front of Jacob, who had hung back shyly. He placed a steady hand on his grandson's shoulder, looking into the boy's eyes with fierce pride. "You never have to be ashamed of your name," Samuel said firmly, his voice carrying the weight of their struggle. "We fought for it. We earned it." Jacob's face broke into a wide smile, and he threw his arms around his grandfather's neck. Samuel held him close, closing his eyes as he savored the moment he'd dreamed of for so long. As they walked toward Olivia's car together, Samuel paused and turned back, taking one final look at the prison. His expression was solemn as he thought of the men still inside, the ones whose stories had yet to be told, whose freedom was still just a dream. The aroma of roasted garlic and herbs filled the Hayes family home as Olivia set the last dish on the dining table. The scene before her seemed almost surreal. Her father, Samuel, sitting at the head of the table, free from his prison uniform, dressed in a comfortable sweater that made him look more like the dad she remembered from her childhood. Jacob couldn't contain his excitement, practically bouncing in his chair as he watched his grandfather cut into the perfectly cooked steak. "Is it good, Grandpa?" "Mom made it special for you." Samuel's eyes crinkled with joy as he took his first bite. "Better than anything I've tasted in years, buddy." The simple act of using real silverware seemed to fascinate Samuel. His movements were deliberate, almost reverent, as if each motion was a gift to be savored. Olivia noticed how he kept glancing around the room, taking in the warm yellow walls, the family photos, the gentle breeze coming through the open window. "I forgot what freedom smells like," Samuel said softly, closing his eyes and inhaling deeply. The fresh air, home-cooked food, no metal doors clanging. Olivia watched him, her heart aching at how such simple things now seemed extraordinary to him. "Dad, you know you don't have to fight anymore. You can just live." Samuel set down his fork, his expression turning serious but gentle. "I can't just live. Not while others are still in that place." He glanced at a stack of legal papers on the nearby counter, cases of other inmates he'd promised to help. Olivia nodded, understanding but worried. She'd seen firsthand how the system could drain someone's spirit, how it could consume every waking moment. Yet she knew her father, his determination, his sense of justice, his need to help others who were trapped in the same nightmare he'd escaped. Jacob reached over and grabbed Samuel's hand. "Can you teach me how to fish tomorrow, Grandpa? Like you promised?" Samuel's face softened as he squeezed his grandson's hand. "Of course, buddy. First thing in the morning." The moment captured everything Olivia had dreamed of during those dark years. Her father, free and happy, building a relationship with Jacob, creating memories that prison had stolen from them. Samuel picked up his glass, the ice clinking gently against the sides. "To second chances," he said, raising it in a toast. The autumn wind whipped through the cemetery, rustling fallen leaves across the weathered headstones. Olivia Hayes stood motionless before a simple gray marker, her coat pulled tight against the chill. The engraved letters stared back at her. Ryan Carter, beloved husband and officer. Her fingers traced the cold metal of his police badge, feeling every ridge and dent. She'd kept it in a drawer for years, unable to look at it, yet unable to let it go. Now, its weight in her palm felt different. Less like a burden and more like something she could finally set down. "I used to think I knew you," she whispered to the stone. Her voice was steady, though her eyes glistened. "I thought we had everything figured out. A happy marriage, a beautiful son, a perfect life." She paused, watching her breath form small clouds in the cold air. "But then Dad was arrested and you were gone before I could ask why." The journal entries she'd discovered during her father's case had revealed Ryan's name, hinting at his involvement in the corruption. But like so many pieces of this puzzle, his true role remained unclear. Had he been trying to expose the truth? Or had he been part of the cover-up? "I don't know if you were a good man or a bad one," Olivia continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I do know this. I won't let my son grow up in your shadow." She knelt down, the damp grass soaking through her jeans. For a moment, she studied the badge one last time, the symbol of justice that had meant so much to both Ryan and her father, yet had come to represent such different things. Gently, she placed the badge at the base of the headstone. The metal caught a brief glint of sunlight breaking through the clouds. Years of questions, of guilt, of wondering what Ryan knew and why he never told her. All of it seemed to lift from her shoulders as she stood. The sound of running footsteps made her turn. Jacob was racing across the cemetery, his small face bright with excitement. "Mom! Mom! Grandpa's waiting in the car. He says we're going for ice cream." Olivia smiled, reaching out to take his warm hand in hers. She gave one final glance at Ryan's grave, then turned away, following her son's eager tugging. The past could keep its secrets. She had chosen the future. Olivia sat at her mahogany desk, surrounded by towering stacks of manila folders. Each one held a story of injustice, a life put on hold behind prison walls. Sunlight streamed through her office window, catching the framed newspaper headlines that lined the walls. "Justice prevails, Maria Velasquez freed after 5 years," read one of them. Her fingers traced the edge of a new case file when her phone buzzed. Another desperate plea for help. She'd received dozens this week alone, each more heartbreaking than the last. The Hayes Foundation for Justice had become a beacon of hope for the wrongfully convicted. The phone rang again. This time it was State Senator Roger Delaney's office. Olivia straightened in her chair as his deep voice came through the speaker. "Ms. Hayes, your foundation's work hasn't gone unnoticed," Delaney said, his tone serious. "There's a case I need you to look at. David Cole, convicted 15 years ago on testimony we now know was false." Olivia pulled up her laptop, typing the name. "Tell me more, Senator." "Cole was a detective like your father, convicted of murder based on planted evidence and coerced witness statements." Delaney paused. "Sound familiar?" Her hands stilled over the keyboard. The parallels to her father's case sent a chill down her spine. As Delaney shared more details, Olivia opened the digital case file he'd sent. Crime scene photos, witness statements, and trial transcripts filled her screen. "The similarities are striking," Olivia admitted, scanning the documents. "That's why I came to you," Delaney replied. "Your foundation has the best track record for overturning wrongful convictions. Cole's family has been fighting for years, but nobody would listen." Olivia studied Cole's booking photo, a man in his 40s with the same determined look her father had worn during his trial. She thought of Samuel, who now volunteered at the foundation, helping other innocent inmates navigate the system. "I'll take the case," Olivia said firmly, already making notes on her legal pad. "Thank you, Ms. Hayes. This could be another landmark case for your foundation." After hanging up, Olivia opened David Cole's case file fully. Evidence logs, appeal documents, and family statements spilled across her desk. She picked up a photo of Cole with his daughter at her high school graduation, taken just weeks before his arrest. The injustice of it all hit her hard. Another family torn apart, another innocent life wasted behind bars. But this time, she had the power to help. This was exactly why she'd started the foundation. Olivia reached for her legal pad and began writing, mapping out her strategy for Cole's case. The familiar determination settled over her as she worked, knowing that somewhere in these files lay the key to another man's freedom. Olivia stood before Judge Ellen Warner, her posture straight and confident despite the prosecution's dismissive attitude. The courtroom felt heavy with 2 decades of injustice weighing on every word. "Your Honor," Olivia began, her voice clear and steady, "David Cole has spent 20 years behind bars for a crime he didn't commit. The prosecution calls this appeal a waste of time. But I ask you, what could be a better use of this court's time than correcting a grave miscarriage of justice?" District Attorney Peterson scoffed, shuffling papers on his desk. "Ms. Hayes is making a spectacle, just like she did with the Velasquez case. The evidence was solid 20 years ago, and it's solid now." Olivia didn't flinch. Instead, she pulled out 3 sworn affidavits, holding them up for the court to see. "I have here statements from 3 key witnesses who testified against Mr. Cole in 1993. All 3 have recanted their testimony, stating they were pressured by police to identify Mr. Cole as the perpetrator." David Cole sat at the defendant's table, his hands clasped tightly together. His gray hair and lined face showed the toll of 2 decades in prison, but his eyes remained fixed on Olivia, clinging to every word. Judge Warner leaned forward, adjusting her glasses. "These are serious allegations, Ms. Hayes." "There's more, Your Honor." Olivia approached the bench with a thick folder. "DNA evidence that wasn't available in 1993 now conclusively proves that the blood found at the crime scene could not have been Mr. Cole's." The judge took her time reviewing the documents while the courtroom remained silent. David Cole's breathing grew heavier with each passing moment. After what felt like hours, Judge Warner looked up. In light of this new evidence and the recanted testimony of key witnesses, this court has no choice but to overturn Mr. Cole's conviction. She paused, removing her glasses. Mr. Cole, you are hereby exonerated of all charges. David Cole's composure crumbled. Tears streamed down his weathered face as he gripped the table for support. Olivia walked over and extended her hand, which he grabbed with both of his, shaking it vigorously as he whispered, "Thank you. Thank you." The sound of his gratitude echoed in the suddenly silent courtroom, a powerful reminder of justice finally served. Samuel Hayes adjusted the microphone, his weathered hands steady despite the hundreds of eyes fixed upon him. The university auditorium was packed with law students, activists, and journalists, all eager to hear from the wrongfully convicted detective who'd become a symbol of justice reform. In the front row, Olivia watched her father with misty eyes, her hand resting protectively on Jacob's shoulder. Her 8-year-old son sat perfectly still, his eyes wide with admiration, as he watched his grandfather command the stage. 25 years ago, Samuel began, his voice carrying the weight of experience, I put on a badge every morning, believing in justice. I served this country as a cop. And then I served time for something I didn't do. That is the reality we live in. A hushed silence fell over the crowd. Samuel continued, his words measured and clear. The system I once defended betrayed me. But today, I'm not here to talk about revenge or bitterness. I'm here to talk about change. He gestured toward Olivia, a proud smile crossing his face. My daughter never stopped fighting for the truth. And now, through her foundation, we fight for others. Because for every innocent person behind bars, there's a family being torn apart. Several students wiped away tears as Samuel shared the details of his wrongful conviction. He spoke about the dark nights in his cell, the guards who looked the other way, and the men he'd left behind who still waited for justice. When I was finally exonerated, Samuel continued, I could have walked away. But how could I enjoy my freedom knowing others were suffering the same fate? That's why I'm here today, speaking to future lawyers and activists, because you have the power to change things. Jacob tugged at his mother's sleeve, whispering, Mom, Grandpa's really brave, isn't he? Olivia squeezed her son's hand, feeling a complex mix of emotions wash over her. Pride at her father's strength, sadness for the years they'd lost, hope for the changes they were creating together. Samuel's voice grew stronger as he reached the heart of his message. Every case matters. Every life matters. And if you're sitting here today, thinking about going into law or advocacy, remember this. Justice isn't just a word. It's a fight worth fighting. The audience hung on his every word, many taking notes furiously. Some held up phones, recording his speech for social media. Samuel's story was spreading, inspiring a new generation to take action against wrongful convictions. As Samuel concluded his speech, the auditorium erupted in applause. Students rose to their feet, their faces showing determination and purpose. This wasn't just a lecture, it was a call to action. Olivia caught her father's eye across the room, exchanging a knowing look. Their fight wasn't over. The envelope sat on Olivia's desk, Rachel's familiar handwriting stark against the white paper. Olivia's fingers trembled slightly as she picked it up, memories of betrayal still fresh despite the months that had passed. Inside, a single sheet of paper carried 5 simple words. I'm trying to make things right. 3 days later, Olivia walked into a small coffee shop downtown, her heart pounding against her ribs. Rachel sat in a corner booth, looking smaller somehow, more fragile than Olivia remembered. When their eyes met, Rachel's hands tightened around her coffee cup. Thank you for coming, Rachel said softly as Olivia slid into the seat across from her. The distance between them felt like miles, though only a small table separated them. Rachel took a shaky breath. I've been working at the Justice Reform Alliance. We help people who've been wronged by the system. Her voice cracked. People like your father. Olivia remained silent, studying the woman who had once been her closest friend. Rachel's eyes were rimmed with dark circles, her usually perfect makeup absent, her shoulders hunched with the weight of guilt. I know it doesn't make up for what I did, Rachel continued, tears welling in her eyes. Nothing ever will. But every day I try to help someone else's father, someone else's child. Her hands shook as she wiped her eyes. I see your face in every person I help. I hear your voice in every story of injustice. The tears came freely now, rolling down Rachel's cheeks. I was a coward, Liv. I chose wrong, and I'll live with that forever. But I swear, I'm trying to make it right. Olivia watched as Rachel broke down, her former friend's shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. The anger that had burned in Olivia's chest for months flickered, mixing with something else. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps understanding. After a long moment, Olivia spoke, her voice steady but quiet. I don't know if I can ever forget, but I hope you keep trying. Rachel nodded through her tears, accepting the words for what they were. Not absolution, but a chance to prove herself through actions rather than words. The bright lights from the documentary crew filled Olivia's office, casting sharp shadows across the walls covered in newspaper clippings and case files. Clara Rodriguez, the producer, leaned forward in her chair, adjusting the small microphone clipped to Olivia's blazer. Just speak from your heart, Clara said softly. Tell us how it all began. Olivia took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The camera's red light blinked on, and she began to speak. I remember sitting in that courtroom, watching them sentence my father to death for something he didn't do. The filming continued throughout the day. Samuel sat in the same chair hours later, his face weathered but dignified. I spent years in prison, he said, his voice steady and clear. But I wasn't the only one. There are thousands more, and I'm still fighting for them. The documentary crew captured everything. The stacks of case files, the tired faces of Olivia's staff working late into the night, the tears of families reunited after years of separation. They filmed Maria Velasquez hugging her children, David Cole walking free, and countless others whose lives had been changed by the Hayes Foundation. Olivia watched the rough cut in the editing room, her throat tight with emotion. On screen, she saw herself arguing in court, her voice passionate as she fought for justice. She saw Jacob visiting his grandfather in prison, and later, the moment Samuel finally walked free. Clara paused the footage. This is going to change how people see the justice system, she said. Your story, it makes people care. When the final cut was ready, Olivia and Samuel sat together in the screening room. As the credits began to roll, Samuel reached over and took his daughter's hand. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They both knew their work was far from over. The heavy metal doors of Maxwell Correctional Facility creaked open as Olivia and Samuel stepped inside. The familiar smell of industrial cleaners and stale air hit them both, bringing back memories they'd rather forget. But today was different. They weren't here as prisoners or visitors, but as advocates. Guards led them down a long corridor lined with cells, dozens of faces pressed against the bars watching them pass. Some inmates nodded in recognition at Samuel, while others whispered among themselves. Olivia noticed her father's jaw tighten, but his steps remained steady. They entered the prison's common area where 20 men sat waiting. Each had claimed wrongful conviction. Each had evidence that had been ignored or suppressed. Samuel scanned the faces, remembering his own time here. A thin man with graying hair stood up. Mr. Hayes, he said, his voice trembling slightly. I'm Marcus Reynolds. You probably don't remember me, but we were in Block C together. Samuel's eyes softened with recognition. I remember, Marcus. You helped me in the library. You gave me hope, sir, Marcus continued, his hands fidgeting. When they first brought you in, everyone knew you were innocent. But you never broke. You never gave up. You showed us that the truth matters. Olivia watched as her father placed a gentle hand on Marcus's shoulder. The other men leaned forward, their stories spilling out one after another. A young man wrongfully identified in a lineup. An elderly prisoner convicted on fabricated evidence. A father serving time for a crime that physical evidence proved he couldn't have committed. Olivia took detailed notes, her heart heavy but her resolve strengthening with each story. I promise you, she said, looking each man in the eye, we will review every single case. This isn't just about one man's story anymore. This is about fixing a broken system. Samuel nodded, his voice firm. We won't stop until every innocent person walks free. That's a promise. The men's faces lit up with something they hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real, tangible hope. Marcus wiped tears from his eyes as he shook their hands. As the guards began leading the prisoners back to their cells, the setting sun streamed through the barred windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Olivia and Samuel walked toward the exit, their footsteps echoing in the now quiet corridor. The massive gates closed behind them with a final clang. The sun was setting behind the prison walls, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. They weren't just two people fighting against injustice anymore. They had become something bigger, a beacon of hope for those who had lost everything but refused to give up on the truth. Olivia walked into her office, exhausted from a long day in court. The setting sun cast long shadows through the windows, painting the room in warm, golden hues. She paused in the doorway, her heart melting at the sight before her. Jacob sat cross-legged on her office chair, his small frame dwarfed by the large leather seat. A thick legal textbook lay open on the desk in front of him, and his finger traced the lines as he read. His brow furrowed in concentration, reminding her so much of herself at that age. He looked up as she entered, his face breaking into an eager smile. Mom, do you think I could help people like you someday? Olivia's throat tightened with emotion. She crossed the room and sat beside him, running her fingers through his soft brown hair. You already do, sweetheart. Samuel stood in the doorway, watching the scene with pride gleaming in his eyes. He'd stopped by to drop off some case files and found his grandson already hard at work. Looks like justice runs in the family, he said softly. Jacob's eyes lit up at his grandfather's words. He straightened in the chair, pulling it closer to the desk with determination. Can you teach me about your cases? I want to understand how you help people. Olivia watched as Jacob picked up one of the case files, handling it with careful reverence. His eyes scanned the pages slowly, taking in every detail. Though some words were beyond his understanding, his dedication was clear in every movement. What's this word mean? He asked, pointing to a legal term. That's exoneration, Olivia explained. It means proving someone is innocent after they've been wrongly accused. Jacob nodded seriously, committing the word to memory. Like what you did for Grandpa? Exactly like that, Samuel said, moving to stand behind Jacob's chair. Olivia felt tears prick at her corners of her eyes as she watched her son absorb everything with such genuine interest. This wasn't just a child's passing curiosity. She could see the same fire in his eyes that had driven her through all those years of fighting for her father's freedom. Jacob turned another page, already eager to learn more. His small fingers traced the lines of text carefully, his expression focused and determined. The sight of him sitting there, surrounded by case files and legal documents, painted a picture of hope for the future. Can I help you with your next case? He asked, looking up at his mother with earnest eyes. Olivia smiled warmly. Of course you can, sweetheart. We'll start small, okay? Olivia sat at her mahogany desk, fingers hovering over the keyboard, as she crafted her speech for the upcoming National Justice Reform Conference. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the walls of her office, a testament to years of fighting for the truth. Newspaper clippings, case files, and photographs of freed inmates covered nearly every inch of space. Her eyes drifted to a particularly meaningful headline: Hayes Foundation secures 50th exoneration. Below it, Maria Velasquez's smiling face beamed back at her, reunited with her children after 3 years of wrongful imprisonment. Next to that, David Cole's story proclaimed another victory for justice. She typed slowly, choosing her words with care. Justice isn't just about following the law. It's about standing up when everyone else sits down. It's about speaking truth when lies are easier to swallow. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. An unknown number flashed across the screen. Without hesitation, Olivia reached for it. She'd learned long ago that every call could mean another life waiting to be saved, another truth waiting to be uncovered. Hayes Foundation, she answered, her voice steady and professional. A trembling voice responded, Ms. Hayes, my brother, He's been in prison for 12 years. We have new evidence, but nobody will listen." Olivia grabbed a notepad, already jotting down details. The fear in the caller's voice was familiar. She'd heard it countless times before. It was the sound of someone desperate for help, clinging to their last thread of hope. As she listened to the caller's story, her eyes wandered to the family photo on her desk. Samuel stood tall and proud, his hand resting on Jacob's shoulder. Olivia herself smiled from between them, her expression determined. They looked like warriors because that's what they had become. Below the photo, a simple brass plaque caught the sunlight. Its words had become more than just a motto, they were a promise. For the ones who refuse to be silenced. Olivia turned back to her computer screen, the conference speech still waiting to be finished. But the new case demanded attention. It always did. Because this wasn't just a job or a mission, it was who she had become. Each case was another chance to right a wrong, to fight back against a system that too often forgot its purpose. She began typing again, but this time in a case file document. Case number 247, Michael Torres. Wrongful conviction suspected. New evidence suppressed. The fight never truly ended, and Olivia Hayes wouldn't have it any other way. If you enjoyed the story of Olivia, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.